As a way of introducing this evening, I'm going to share with you the essence of what Michael brought forward as an introduction to these weekly gatherings. And I'm going to share and read this to you. This is a weekly gathering for those seeking greater awareness of their true nature. There are many paths and approaches to higher consciousness and to greater awakening to who we truly are. The essence, the truth of all these paths is more about remembering who we are and have always been, rather than becoming something different or more than we have seen ourselves to be. A way of God's remembrance goes to the heart, to the intention of all the paths. This is what we will explore each week. Michael will share thoughts and awarenesses that come forward as relevant and purposeful for our time together. This will be followed by questions and answers related to what he shares about. Tonight, we will begin with an invocation of light to help support us all to be in collective alignment. That invocation and the sharing, I now have the blessing of bringing forward our friend, Michael Hayes.
Essential force and power in all that we're doing here, all that we hope to do here. And my intent is always to surrender to that spirit and to give myself over to its guidance and to its direction as much as I can. And to support you to similarly make yourself available to that spirit. We talk about this very much in terms of remembrance because the kingdom of heaven is already at hand. The blessings already are, which also means the blessings always are. So our intent is to make ourselves conscious, available, aware, and one with the divine state, the state of God that is underlying all that we deal with, all that appears before our eyes, our senses, our imagination, our mind, our desires. It underlies all that and allows all that to be present and allows us to play in that, to learn from that, to be fulfilled in it, and to be disappointed in it, to laugh and cry, to live and die. Always there is this one that is God, that is the truth, that is underlying the whole journey, the whole expression of our individual lives. It reminds us continuously of its presence by giving us the next opportunity to learn and grow. And in surrendering to its presence with us, we begin to see reality as it knows reality. We become the observer behind the screen, in a sense, behind the camera, watching the whole movie. We gain an observational point of view that gives us the natural altitude, an uplifted view that allows us to see the opportunity, to see the pitfalls, to see the lessons, to see the joy, and to see the gains that we can make in this extraordinary process and opportunity we have in living physically, in living as individuals in time and space. The traveler consciousness, that is a term most of you probably know, but it basically is talking about an essential force within creation and beyond creation that holds a singular intent of remembrance for all consciousness. In the midst of the incredible forces within creation that promote a forgetfulness, a losing track of our divine nature. It holds a never-ending consciousness of remembrance for all beings. It is the ultimate reminder of our oneness with God, our oneness with one another, our oneness with life, and the oneness that is beyond all the stories of life and all the coming and going and all the living and dying and all the travailing. It is always holding that for us. So we open to that consciousness as it serves us and it serves all consciousness as an essential part of our remembrance. We also open to the Christ consciousness, which has been extended in a more particular way into this creation and into this world as part of this creation as a opportunity to come into this remembrance in a fuller way, in a greater way, and in a faster way. Further opens the door of possibility that we might expedite the learning process of this creation. And in that expediting of that learning process, we might gain the opportunity of grace through forgiveness. And we might be able to bypass a lot of the repetition of karma, the repetition of experience that normally is the outcome of living in the flesh. So we're blessed to have these consciousnesses serving with us and supporting us in this action. And we come into this consciousness, opening ourselves in all ways to be available to their truth and to be used to their purpose should they choose to use us. In this moment now, we are opening to this presence of Christ, this presence of love eternal, this presence that reminds us again and again that God is love, and through the loving, we find our transformation, we find the upliftment and the remembrance we seek. So each of us then is connected to these forces of God and is offered the opportunity to be utilized by these forces. We may utilize them and be utilized by them simultaneously. This opportunity is always available in some way, but in a more specific way, it becomes more available by our intent to be one with it and to receive of its grace. And so at this time, we do say, dear Lord, we open to your grace to be receptive, to be in this greater realization, this greater remembrance of the eternal togetherness that we share with you. And in this process, we surrender those things in our personality or in our personal existence that would run in a contrary fashion to this surrender. They would want us to amplify our specialness or amplify our individual story as unique and something separate and something to be clung to, something to be embraced, endorsed, and celebrated. We surrender that in our consciousness that would drive us to that approach. We open ourselves to be undone by the power of your loving and the power of your grace, by the power of your presence in us and through us and with us. We open to be available to your loving care. And if that loving care dissolves us entirely into your truth, we do receive and we do surrender and we do accept that in your care, we are complete, and in your loving, we are whole. We open now to this truth, to the availability of this truth, And as we open to this truth, we become aware more consciously of this sacred dance, the flow between that which is beyond all form and all creation and that which is playing the game of creation. We recognize there is a movement out of all unmanifest reality into manifest reality, and a movement that goes back from manifest reality into the unmanifest. And we surrender to the truth that our consciousness is available to each, that our consciousness might be vulnerable to this opportunity, that it might be available to give and to be given to. And so now we breathe, and with each breath, we accept into ourselves the grace that comes from the heart of God, and we exhale out anything that we would return back into that heart of God. We inhale that which comes from the heart of God, and we exhale back out that which is going to go back into the heart of God. And we do this again, inhaling the grace that comes from God's heart and exhaling it, all that we give up to that grace. With inhale, we come more into the remembrance of our oneness with God. And with an exhale, we surrender those things that would have pushed us into forgetfulness. And so now with this inhale, we inhale the remembrance and we exhale the forgetfulness. And we inhale the remembrance and we exhale the forgetfulness. We inhale remembrance. We exhale the forgetfulness. Now we allow ourselves to be conscious of this flow, of this reality, of this truth, and make ourselves available to its utilization. We receive again its power, which brings forgiveness, and we exhale as the forgiveness has its effect, and we release ourselves from the forgetfulness. There is a saying that the only truest forgiveness we need is to forgive ourselves for forgetting we are divine. And so we forgive ourselves for forgetting we are divine, which means we choose remembrance. And in this remembrance, we allow all the blessings that are already present to be one with us as we are one with them. And it is so, and it is done. Amen. Pirish Pisha. Now that we've opened ourselves to this opportunity for the Spirit to live in us and through us, we will make ourselves available to questions, remembering that the focus of the questions hopefully will be related to what has been shared here and to spiritual awakening rather than to the personal agendas and issues of one's life. I don't have a problem with answering those things, but I prefer to do that and in other formats so that many people can gain from what is shared. So that said, if anybody would care to share, this would be a time to make that possible. Okay. I see Gary and Robin Bierman. If you have a video, if you have video, that would be nice, but it's not required.
My video isn't working. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. So my question is, um, I've noticed what seems to be two different realities. One being this moving towards oneness and unity and infinity and God and whatever all that is. And at the same time, I'm looking to see how to reconcile that with me being seeming to be an individual and having a personality and the family I love and the friends and people I love and the goals that I have and the story of me. And how do I move more into that infinite nature and oneness and have the individual at the same time, which seems almost contradictory to it?
That's a really good question. Um, one key I'll start with is just say, you talked about moving more into that oneness. It behooves us to be careful with the words we tell ourselves or tell other people, in that the kingdom of heaven is always at hand, which means in our individual nature, we'll tend to conceive this as an action of moving into something, which would be then we might call an action of becoming. And in the spiritual world, this thing is often called the great path of becoming, which just means the endless search for God or the endless search for oneness. But the reality is we are always with God. But while we're in the flesh, while we're doing these lives, we have engagement with the illusion of individuality. So the world would trick us by saying it's an either or process. And so, first off, when we think like that, we say, well, I'd like to go do the spiritual thing, the awakening. However, I have these responsibilities. I have children. I have bills to pay. I have that. And so the world would present to your consciousness the idea that these are contradictory things. But they're not really contradictory as much as their reality is as known or related to through different levels of perception. And when you perceive reality from on high, from the oneness of spirit, that reality you perceive is inclusive of the reality of your individuation. It includes that as well. And so the reality of the individuation or the experience of the individuation is embraced within that greater consciousness. Now, when you're really in that greater consciousness, you kind of will know the unreality of your individual life, but it's really just saying the different nature of the reality of your individuation. You as an individual tend to think of your individuation as intensely real and tangible. From the higher consciousness of spirit, you realize that only the spirit has that permanence, and that your individual existence is like the flicker on a TV screen or a movie screen, that it has a kind of reality, but not the true reality. And so you'll understand it and see it differently. You know, the biggest challenge that we get in this world as individuals, and in some ways, the mastery of our life here on this planet, comes down to something we might say in this way. Can we come to that consciousness where we will choose, to be loving, even when all the experiences and all the information comes our way from the world and from the voices in our head push on us to choose less than loving? If we can choose the loving regardless of all that, that would be the clearest sign yet that we have come truly into the remembrance of the divine and God. So that's a big clue of what you do when you have to live a life where there's a lot of responsibilities to deal with the physical world. You just keep looking for the loving in all of it. And as you find that loving, you're automatically starting to approach the world from a remembered state, because the essence of the remembrance is loving. When you go into the high, high, high country of God, of the Spirit, up into those levels beyond all the levels, the one truth that is above all other things is that God is love. And you will know it in such a way that you can never forget it. But see, what I'm going to say now is a paradox in relationship, because you will never forget it, but you may forget that you remember it. See, it's double talk. But what happens is, in the place of you that is one with God, you will always know that God is love. And you will know that you're that place. But the paradox of this condition is that when part of your essence is extended into time and space, that part of your essence can get absorbed in the time-space experience, or distracted into the time-space experience so completely that, at least it seems, that you no longer are in the remembrance. But what has happened is you're just distracted from that remembrance. So I don't know if this is helping you, but this is the things that I look for as keys to what we're talking about. See, I know that this is something everyone can experience, because this is something that's true for everyone already. There's no one who's not one with God. That just doesn't happen. Sometimes our beguilement by the world of time and space is really powerful and complete, and we wander in this creation for millions or billions of years. But essentially, it doesn't change the truth that we're always one with God, and that part of the essence of us that is one with God is always in remembrance of God. It's a paradox. So if this helps you, I hope it helps you, but that's my answer for you.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. Bless you. Thank you. Let's see. Okay. To see who's Laura Kulza.
Hey, Michael.
Hello, Laura.
How are you?
I'm really good right now.
Good. Thank you so much for doing this.
Hmm.
This is beautiful. I'm so appreciative. So appreciative.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
It really makes such huge difference in my life.
Oh, grateful.
Yeah, I really mean
Really.
it. Yeah, I
How
miss
can we
you.
support you? How can we support you
Well,
today?
yeah, there's a couple things. I went through this I've gone through some kind of strange things, and it's hopefully I think it will relate to other people in the group. Where I went through some really heavy judgment, and it was just everybody and everything and myself, and it was really ugly, you know? And then I came out of it and I was like, what was that? And I couldn't understand why I had been so into the separation with me and other people, with me and God. And so I wanted to start with that.
Well, there are forces in this reality that are bigger than us and apart from us. And those forces can sometimes have a big effect. Um, one second. You can close that window. Oh. So what I'm hearing in this situation for you, you can think of this as a wave of darkness that you got caught into. We think a lot about karma, which translate as action, but we also tend to think of karma very much as a particular thing, like I have a karma, you have a karma. But there's karmas or fields of action that include many people. There's karmic, you can sort of know a karmic field any is it present anywhere there's identification, where consciousness has a sense of itself is tied to that action. So the that wave of darkness was like a karmic field, or a wave of darkness that moved through a karmic field that you still have an alignment to or attachment to.
Can you explain that a little bit more, the
Yeah,
attachment part? Yeah.
sure. So, well, this would be interesting. So talk about it. So for each of us as individuals, we might say, okay, um, so I say, Laura, um, so are you a woman?
Yes.
Okay. So you identify yourself with women, the field of women.
Yes.
Okay. So that's a division between males and females. Okay.
Right.
All right. Would you say, are you American?
Yes.
So you identify yourself and see, you identify with a karmic field of being American.
Yes. Yes.
See, now we can keep breaking this down. We could say, are you, what you might say, they might say, well, are you a Christian? Are you a Buddhist? And these are just each time when the funny thing is, we could say, I'm a woman or I'm a man, but not with identification, just because as a point of the reference of conversation or the reference of how the world works, people, when they ask that question, this is what the information they're looking for. They're looking for information related to gender. But you could be uh, know yourself as a woman, but not be identified with a woman. Say, no, actually, I'm I'm more identified with as a soul.
Yes.
And in the way of a way of God's remembrance that we're talking about, as you really go through that process, you will likely come to a point where you actually will give up identification with yourself as the soul and start to know yourself as spirit.
Mm. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And so this wave of darkness was prevailing upon you and amplifying um, a lot of activity, in your case, in the second chakra of your body.
Okay.
And when these kind of things move on us, if we're paying attention, we'll notice there'll be activation of different energy centers in our body. And
Mhm.
usually the ones that are troubling for us are going to be the ones in the lower chakras.
Right.
And that's not always the case. You can actually have very, very, very subtle forms of negativity that will actually amplify sort of a lower octave of a higher chakra to try and keep you out of that highest octave. Can that happen? Yeah, it does happen.
Yeah.
In this case, this wasn't that. This was me. You knew it because you were very judgmental. because it was reinforcing the sense of separation and the
Yes.
sense of rightness and wrongness.
Hmm. And I was really, really angry and really, um, really hard on myself, like not able to forgive myself for being so, critical. It took me a while.
Yeah.
That it just isn't normal to go into, for me, it was not a normal thing.
Well, there's a lot of it, a lot of this going on the planet right now. And this will apply for a lot of us. We're being really tested by some of the things going on in the bigger news, for example, which will push on karmas of us to take a position, take a stance, to become righteous around different things, which will lock us into high activity in our lower chakras. And then things like this wave of darkness will come in to just amplify it and try and create larger discord, larger disharmony.
So I don't really know what took me back into the loving, but I did come back.
Yeah, but you've
And it
survived it.
kind of
It
it
was,
kind of frightened me too.
yeah,
Like I hope I don't get
think
lost
of,
in that again.
well, think of it as a test, but it didn't win the day with you
Yeah.
because you got out of it, you got beyond it.
Yeah.
Your primary karma in your case was largely karma with patriotism.
Yeah.
And and patriotism ultimately means is, we usually think of loyalty to country.
Hmm.
Pater usually means father, so to
Right.
the fatherland. But um, but it gets us to become loyal to something less than God, loyal to something less than spirit, loyal to something less than loving.
Yeah.
And when we get caught, these things happen. And this is running rampant on this planet right now through
Yes.
all sorts
Right.
of
I
situations.
feel a division. I feel that division between people. Hmm.
Well, there, from a certain level of perception, there is a division between people. And from the higher perception of spirit, there's only oneness.
Right.
And so the more we can stay in that perception of the only oneness, the more and the more those energy fields moving in creation that would promote the separation can be limited in their effect.
Do you have a suggestion of if I were to spiral down again into negativity, what is a good way to pull up quicker? Because it took
So
me a couple days.
we'll start by pulling your focus into the higher centers, the
There's
crown, third eye,
okay.
and just say, Father, I open to receive your blessings. And in your case, I'd probably say, Dear Lord, I open to receive you and open to let the Lord lift you into the higher consciousness, not just in these chakras, but even above that.
That's
In-
actually how I pulled out of it.
Interesting. Well, I'm
Yeah.
just reminding you of what you already know
Yeah, I
then.
know. I just forgot. Yeah, and it didn't
Well,
hit till you said it.
okay. So
Yeah.
so you know this technique and that'll work for all of us.
Yes.
And these are days when the utility of that kind of technique may be very present
Yes.
and it's very wise for us to utilize that. We have a lot of tools,
Yeah.
but if we don't use them,
Right.
we're going to be sorely put upon by these negative force fields.
Yeah. I was feeling like it was negative forces.
Well, it is. I just called it by the name I was given, a wave of darkness. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
A
But
rose by
when
a
I
rose, a
go
rose
ahead.
by any other name would be as sweet, and horse manure by any other name would be as smelly. So the same thing.
Gotcha.
It's not what
Yeah.
it's called. It's what it does.
Yeah, and I think it was on some level, I found it strangely enough, I found it helpful.
Well, in the spirit world, you're being used as an anchor of light to try and hold and counteract a lot of what's going on with this. And a lot of higher consciousness beings are being used that way. And so trying to undermine you. It's also trying to undermine, let's call it a service action you're part of.
Right.
And being challenged like that and coming out of that challenge both strengthened you and
Yes.
awakened you in a certain way to a greater knowing. It's almost like for you to get out of it, you had to claim more of who you really are.
Right.
Once you
Exactly.
claim it, you have, it's like I say, once you stake the claim, it's yours.
Yeah. Yes. And the other thing about it was it was a person in particular that I love very dearly, but for some reason, some aspect of her triggered the judgment, and that's when I fell into that darkness. So it was
You
very strange because it came from the love and then it went into the negative and then it came back
Well,
out into love.
because everybody has karmas, and within those karmas, there'll be accessibilities to these things that would be more negative. And so sometimes that's it will happen, and it won't necessarily come where you expect it to come from. It could be from somebody that you normally have a very loving relationship with, and suddenly they'll get caught, and you'll get caught through your association or identification with them. This
Yeah,
is why eternal vigilance is the price of freedom.
that's a beautiful saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't say it, but I'm echoing
Well,
it.
I like it.
Uh,
Yeah.
all
Why
right.
why is it that the people that we love so much we get so mad at? That's so weird to me, but
Because we're more attached.
more touched. Okay.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Bless
Thank you.
you and thank you.
Bless you. Much love.
Thank you.
You too.
Linda Mogitz. Oh, no, maybe she didn't have a hand anymore. Oh, she didn't. Okay. Well, nobody has a hand. Everybody's asleep.
Linda's
Hi,
hand is
Michael.
up. Here you
Oh,
go.
I can't see it. I don't know why? I can't see the hands somehow the way with my screen. So, but I saw she
Um,
had a hand before.
yeah, thank you, Michael. I'm wondering if you would speak a little bit more about the Tuan, the Christ Center of the Earth, what
Um,
Christ is really involved with on the planet, and if we were to involve ourselves in, for instance, intercessory prayer, how best to go into that.
hmm. Well, I should have had Alicia, my wife, here because she likes to talk about the Tuan. Um, I've been aware for a long time about a in my intercessory work, and a lot of the intercessory work I did with John Roger, my teacher, um, that a lot of the work was working very much with what we might call the logos of the planet or the Lord of the planet, which is the Christ consciousness is infusing it. So you kind of would say the Christ action is very much on this earth. Uh, the planet was, we could say, was chosen or anointed to come into a Christing or a shift of consciousness. And it was like, and I can remember back to being part of, or finding out about this and agreeing to be part of helping to bring that forward a long, long time ago, actually in another world. And so the Christing of the planet is basically saying that the way karma gets worked on this earth is just being changed from being solely under the karmic law of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, into the opportunity for souls to choose to work their karma under grace. The biggest difference between the two is when karma is worked under law, the central requirement in the working of karma is that everything must be balanced, an eye for an eye. But when the karma is being worked under grace, the central thing is that the learning must take place and must take place and be demonstrated. And when the learning takes place, that opens the door for grace and forgiveness so that the karma doesn't have to be done an eye for an eye. The karma will get worked out, but it'll be worked out in such a way that nothing will be allowed to obstruct the learning. Because in creating this world and this opportunity to come here, the central purpose of God was the learning and the growing. And so the eye for an eye approach was prioritizing balance, and it was unnecessary delaying the growth and the learning and therefore the whole process. So on the planet, we have a opportunity to receive of this Christ. And as the planet, in a sense, gets more Christ and as more and more consciousness here, more and more people come into alignment and attunement with this other opportunity, that becomes a strengthening of this Christ energetic, you could call it. Now, metaphysically, it would look like in the center of the earth is like a golden orb. And I've seen that. And I've talked a little bit about this. And Alicia might have talked about this too. And because she works with this a lot. I mean, and some of her ideas of how to work with it I think were really beautiful and brilliant. So I was just kind of aware of it. And I was aware of in what I was doing. And when we would travel to different countries, a lot of the clearing of karma would often tie into this force field in the center of the earth, then pulling out negative fields that were old karmic fields in the earth and stuff like that. You can kind of look at that. If you want to look at the earth like as if the earth had chakras, then you could look at the center of the earth as like the crown, and then the little rings of the different levels. You know, some would say, well, that's molten and that's this. And those could be looked like as like different chakras or different energy fields. And so meditating upon it, attuning to it. Again, Alicia Das works with that a lot, and has done talks about this that were really good. You know, visualizing yourself reaching into the center of the earth and core. She talks about like a grounding cord to help with your meditation. There's a lot of things you can do with it. The central thing is be in remembrance of it. For a number of years in some of my classes, I used to tell people Christ is meditating the world awake. When I was telling people that, I was in that moment I was talking about it, I was one with Christ in the center of the earth. And that's where I really understood. Oh, he's meditating the world awake. When I say he, it's not necessarily a person, it's that consciousness of Christ. But for me, I relate to that consciousness very much as connected to Jesus because of my own association with Jesus. But it's a consciousness that goes far beyond any form. So I think any kind of reflection upon that and sending light to that whole awakening process. And just remember, we tend to get a little myopic in how we consider God, and we tend to think of God as always above us and out there in the stars somewhere. But and because mythology teaches us the high gods are in heaven and Hades and Pluto are down in the earth. But the reality is there's nowhere God is not. And so seeing that Christed consciousness in the earth and coming to us through the earth is a very beautiful thing to do and helps to free us from some of the illusions we hold and could be useful in freeing oneself from time and space. Well, thank you for your question. It's not something I've really talked about. Alicia's been talking about it. But I have known about it for a long time. I just never talked about it. It was just one of those things that I knew about because you could see it. And it was instrumental in a lot of the sort of the ministry to the planet work that was being done.
Thank you, Michael. Beautiful.
All right. Thank you. Bless you. Ian Mills.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. I was wondering if you could speak to us about the fear or reluctance to remember.
when we start to come more towards remembrance, there is a pushback in that is our identity. So we can start first with when we come into the human condition. Let's say we're a baby coming in. We're coming out of a higher state, and in that higher state, we know our oneness with God in a different way than we would normally know it here physically. And actually, we actually have to create a kind of identification with the body. We a sense of separate self, a sense of individual self. The word we usually give to that is the ego. So when we start to come in towards remembrance, the ego protests. It fights against that because it's, in a sense, destroying the whole world it's built up, the whole story of itself as true, as real. So it fights. And for a good part of our progression of awakening, our big opponent is that ego. There are forces outside our individuation, what we could call forces of negativity, that also work against us. But a lot of the way they work against us is they amplify our ego. And so eventually we free ourselves as we become more and more conscious, as we move up through levels of consciousness. You could look at it like, well, I got out of the body, so I realized it wasn't the body. And then I moved higher and I realized I wasn't my imagination. And I got higher in consciousness and I realized I was more than my feelings. And I moved up in consciousness, I realized I was more than my thoughts. And then I moved up in higher in consciousness and I realized I was more than me. I realized I was more than this identified form. And so then you start to get into realization of yourself as a soul. Now, as you come into that realization of yourself as a soul, you now have an outlook and availability that helps you to have a kind of empowerment over all the other levels of consciousness. You still have a mind you work with, and you still have emotions that run in you, but you have a point of reference that you're bigger than all that and that you're beyond all that. And so that helps to set you free. And the biggest thing you're setting yourself free with that is the ego's attempt to hold you into identification with yourself, with the form in time and what happens to the form in time and space, to hold you into time and space. The process continues as you become more and more awake, start to know more and more reality as the soul knows it. You'll start to push into higher consciousness and you start to actually push up against even the quote reality or the story of yourself as a soul. Because are you the soul? Yes, you are the soul, but you're also the essence of you is even beyond the soul. The essence of you, the soul is an individuation out of God to serve a purpose of God. But your truth goes even back beyond that individuation as the soul into the essence of God, or we might call it into spirit. And so as you start to have more and more of this opening of consciousness to start to know yourself as spirit, then you get a pushback of even a different kind, and even a more difficult pushback in many ways, which actually come out of the unconscious. And out of the unconscious, that pushback will be an attempt to hold you into not just the story of you in this life as you as Ian, but it'll try and hold you to the story of all your existences in time and space. And for most of us, that's a lot of existences where we've engaged in participating in time and space through form, through physicality, through bodies, through imagination, through emotions, through mind, through unconsciousness. We've engaged in all that. And in that engagement with all that, we've built up not just the individual ego of us in this life, but a sense of ourselves through all of it. Name for that my teacher came up with one. I was working with him on this many, many years ago. We were exploring all this. And the name he gave me for it was the Solic Ego. Now, it's as good as name anything, but we're just talking about that in us that would hold a feel of an identification with all our experiences in time and space, all our experiences in form, all our experiences as even individuated out of spirit, and it pushes back, it seeks to, and it will promote a fear inside, a feeling of like I'll cease to be. There'll be no more me. I'll be nothing. It'll be the end of everything. And it'll throw very primal type fears in the unconscious. And they're very powerful when they hit. And this level of fear may waylay us for many, 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 many lifetimes, where we are moving towards spirit and we have breakthroughs and we get higher and higher, and all of a sudden we hit this. That's it for that life. But at some point, we're ready, and that fear is not strong enough to stop us. And then we come into this thing we call remembrance. Even though that place that would do the fear will want to do the fear, the remembrance happens anyway. Now, a lot of that, how that happens, is through grace, which is really saying the God that we're all part of, the God that we all source from, extends a message of intention down. I'm speaking of it like it's an up-down thing, but down into our consciousness to greater amplify the longing within us. It's almost like the master calls and says, "It's time to come back to me, beloved." And somewhere inside of us, that comes to it, and that gives us a resolve. That gives us a longing, a hunger, insatiability that I must come towards this remembrance. And then we start to not have that remembrance starts to be so painful. And so, whereas before we'd come to the remembrance and the unconscious would create a situation inside of us that was so painful that we would pull back from remembrance. Now, God on high is sending us a message of summoning us back into the remembrance that makes the remembrance more tangible to us and creates an insistence inside of us that we must have this. And it becomes, I call it a spiritual longing, a spiritual ache. And that spiritual ache will come upon you. You may go through periods where the world has kind of got your attention and you're kind of distracted and by different things. And so you're just less attentive to this truth that you are God and that you are one with God and that you're always with God. And you might say, yeah, I know that, I believe that, but you're not experiencing the truth of that. And then you'll start to have this ache. You'll start to have this pain, this suffering inside. But it's very hard to talk about and quantify it. It's just something is there. But then if you find something that helps to reactivate this in you, it'll bring it awake. And suddenly you'll come back. The remembrance will start to move and you'll feel the profoundness of it and the essentiality of it. And you realize the only thing that you truly must have in life is that remembrance. And as that remembrance moves in you, all the other designs of life, all the goals and all the dreams, all the attachments seem as nothing. For in truth, when you have the remembrance, they are nothing. And so it's sometimes said that not one soul will be lost. It's because all the souls are going to be drawn back into the God self they came from, the spirit. And as you feel that remembrance happening, that reactivation of that truth, and as all of us can have that, brings that peace that surpasses understanding and a contentment. Nothing else has to ever happen if this is happening. And hence, that's why it's called a way of God's remembrance. Because it's where we all get to. And we might do a lot of other things to try and make our consciousness more available to it. But in the end, this is truth. We come into the remembrance of we know it. And when we really come enough into the knowing of it, we realize in that knowing of it, we are the one that always knows it. And the one that always knows this is God. And that's when we start to understand the truth when Jesus said, the Father and I are one, as he spoke from the remembrance, that spoke from the Father. And he said, these things I do, you too shall do, and even greater because I go to the Father. So he demonstrated, he went into the Father in the remembrance and spoke from the Father and said, because I'm doing this, he's going to open the door for you also to do this. And because so many of you are going to do this, what you do will be even greater than what I'm doing, because you will have all your numbers, the collective power of all these beings, of all of you coming back to remembrance, will create a greater opportunity of remembrance than even he could do as the one that he was. Because even as we start to become instruments of remembrance, as he was instruments of remembrance, and add our capacity to bring remembrance, and more of us doing it, our bringing remembrance is added to Christ bringing remembrance, is added to John Roger bringing remembrance, is added to St. Francis bringing remembrance, Meister Eckhart bringing remembrance, Buddha bringing remembrance. So when I said Christ is meditating the world awake, he's meditating us all. He's meditating the world into remembrance. And you too. And all of us are heirs to that inheritance, the inheritance of remembrance, and the inheritance of being those who bring forth remembrance in that is in forgetfulness. God bless you. Well, thank you everybody for showing up tonight. I'm going to say a quick prayer for this. We'll be back next Wednesday at same time, 6:30 p.m. Pacific Coast time. And this will be every Wednesday. On Wednesday, May the 22nd, this will be a 2-hour presentation. I'm going to be doing presentation with Alicia Doss Hayes, my wife. And so if you have more questions about remembrance, especially connected to angels, that'd be a good time to bring them forward. All right. Thank you, Father, for this opportunity to come into communion and to the remembrance of your presence with us and your blessings that are upon this earth and in our hearts. We open to receive them and to share them, and to be in that celebratory state that you live in, knowing that the kingdom of heaven is at hand and that the blessings are already present. May your will be done in us and through us. May you bless us and work with each one through this week to amplify and to increase the remembrance and the loving of each consciousness. We give our thanks. Amen. Baruch Bashem.
Love you, Michael. Thank
Love
you.
you.
Michael.
Thank you.
Love to everyone.
Thank
Thank you.
Much
Thank
love.
you,
Thank
Michael.
you.
God
Thank
bless
you.
you.
Thank you,
Bless
Michael.
Thank
you.
you,
Michael.
Beautiful.
You.
Love you all.
You, Michael.
Love you all.
Hi,
Bye.
Michael. Love you.
Love you all.
Bye, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, say leave.
Thank you. God bless you.
Bless you.